Merry Christmas. It's great to be able to wish you guys Merry Christmas one last time. So this is the last time for at least a while that I'm going to be able to wish you guys Merry Christmas. It'll be a few months, maybe 10 months or so before we get to start wishing Merry Christmas again. But January 6th is officially the end of the Christmas season. So we're still in the Christmas season. A lot of people stop celebrating Christmas on Christmas Day, and then a lot of people stop celebrating Christmas on the new year, and they kind of like, oh, that's the end of the holiday season. But we know that Christmas is not only the last thing that we think about before the year ends, it's also the first thing that we think about before the year ends. So I think that's kind of cool that we're celebrating Jesus' birth at the very end of the year and the very beginning of the year, because it passes over that transition. So that's pretty incredible, and I think that's awesome. In the last week, we talked about King Herod, and we talked about some of the horrible things that King Herod did. And now we're talking a little bit about the wise men. But we're actually celebrating, this is actually the reading for Epiphany. Now, if you don't know the word Epiphany or what the Epiphany Day is, that's fine. Might be good. Anyway, we are going to describe some of those things, but we'll just gloss over some of it. If you don't know the word epiphany is like a light bulb. In fact, you could call this Light Bulb Sunday. They don't, because that would sound less academic and intellectual. If Light Bulb Sunday doesn't have quite the ring of it as Epiphany Sunday. But if you see a cartoon character that's running along and has a problem and then all of a sudden gets a bright idea, all of a sudden a light bulb goes off and they get this idea and they realize, oh, this is what I have to do. Well, that's what we're celebrating. We're celebrating the bright idea. There was a commercial that talked about this phenomenon of an epiphany in a very intellectual and philosophical way. It was Mentos, the fresh maker. Did anyone see those Mentos commercials? You remember the Mentos commercials, right? Nothing gets to you, staying fresh, staying cool, with Mentos fresh and full of life. Mentos fresh and full of life. Mentos, the fresh maker. If you haven't seen those commercials, thank you, yeah. That's the first time I've received claps from the pulpit. I should sing more often, apparently. So if you haven't seen those commercials, basically what happens in it is the person has a problem. It's all mimed, by the way, so you don't actually get any words. But the person comes across a problem, and they have to think of a solution. What do I do? So they take a Mentos, and it gives them a fresh idea. So the fresh breath, apparently, feeds their brain, and they get I don't know the logic behind these commercials. I'll give you an example, okay? So there's this one guy, he sits down on a park bench, and then someone comes along and shows him that there's a sign that says, warning, fresh paint. So he looks at his suit, and he realizes that he has paint on his suit. And he's like, oh no, what do I do? And he looks at his clock, and you can tell he's got like a business meeting or something. So he looks at his clock, and he goes, what do I do? And then he takes a Mentos, and he goes, I know. The music is playing at this point. And he starts rolling on the bench like this. Literally, he's sitting on the bench going like this. And the guy's looking at him confused, right? Why are you doing this? Why are you rolling on the bench? And then he shows him the Mentos with now a perfect pinstripe suit. Completely even. And he goes, Mentos. And the guy goes, I get it. Mentos. Totally makes sense. All right? I don't know if it was the Mentos that made it so even. Again, the logic of these commercials is hard to defend. My brother, Doy, and I, we love these commercials, so we decided to shoot some. So we just make up ideas for it. So one idea, for instance, Doy was a football coach, or not coach, quarterback. And he got sacked. And he's like, what do I do? I keep getting sacked. So he took a Mentos. And he got this bright idea. So the guy runs up to him, and he punches him in the face. And the next guy, he kicks him. Finally, he pulls out a gun, and he shoots the guy, right? And then he runs, and he scores a touchdown. And he looks back, and we're all looking at him shot and beaten. We look, why would you do that? And he goes, Mentos, the fresh maker. And we go, oh, it makes sense now. I don't care that I'm shot. You took a Mentos. Okay, I get what happened here. Well, that's not the way Epiphany works. Part of it makes sense, right? The actual revelation came out of nowhere. Where did this come from? I don't know. that makes sense. Unfortunately, the reaction that you get to epiphanies aren't usually like, oh, just show them the Mentos and then it's all okay, whatever you did. In fact, Plato, and yes, I'm going from Mentos to Plato. Plato has this great philosophy about the allegory of the cave. Has anyone heard of the allegory of the cave in the Plato? Well, good, because then you learned something today. That's always good. There's a philosophy that there's this allegory about truth and the way truth works. And in this, there's a group of people that are trapped in a cave, and they're prisoners. They're actually locked so their neck is fixed to one position, so they can't even turn their neck. And from the angle that all they can see is shadows. So whenever an object passes, they just see the shadowy reflection of that object, whatever it may be. So this is their reality. One guy escapes, though. He escapes and he goes out into the light. At first, the light is blinding. He can't see anything. When his eyes finally adjust, though, he sees these objects and he thinks that they're illusions. Like, this isn't what a microphone looks like. A microphone is bigger than this, and it changes in diameter, and it moves around, right? But it would be an illusion to him. So eventually, though, when he looks at it closer, he realizes, wait, this is the real object, and the shadow is the illusion. Upon discovering that his life was all an illusion and the reality of the objects was only seen in the light, he would go back, compelled with his friends and his family to show them real life. Of course, going back, he would have to walk into this dark and dingy area that the light was very dim. His eyes, now adjusting to the light, wouldn't see very well in the darkness. So to the people, when he came back, he would appear blind. When he tells the people these wonderful objects and how they really look and how their whole world is an illusion and what the truth actually looks like, they would mock him. You can't even see anymore. You've been blinded. You are in delusion. You're delusional now. If he tried to get the people to come out of the cave, they would even go to the extent of killing this person because they saw him as pulling them away from their world. If this sounds familiar, it should, because it's echoed in the Bible. That's the way it works. When prophets come and they share the truth about God to people, people deny it and sometimes persecute those prophets even into killing them. And Jesus shares an analogy about that. Paul also talks about that when he says, now I see dimly only as reflected by a mirror, but one day I will see face to face. I will come to the real objects and how they really are. It is light that actually gives meaning to objects. And only by seeing them reflected off of that light do they make sense to us. Other than that, we're just blind people kind of trying to feel our way through. C.S. Lewis has a quote about this. He says, I believe in God just as I believe in the sun. Not just because I see the sun, but because by the light of the sun, I see everything else. By the light of the sun, I see everything else. And that's the truth of Christianity. It is through the light of Christ that we see everything else. That objects are made clear and understandable, and we understand the purpose of them. If we're left on those objects alone, we can fall into the illusion of thinking we understand those objects, but we're just seeing the shadow. We're just seeing the reflection. Last week, I talked about an experience that I had where my wife and I, we went down into these mammoth caves, these huge, dark caves, and we had lights along the path. And when we got to this big opening space down in the depths of the earth, they turned off the light. It became really apparent that if they had a power outage, we would have been in trouble. Finding our way back would have been nearly impossible because it was pitch black. There wasn't even shadows. Then the woman, she lit a candle, and just from this one little candle, this tiny little flame, it lit up the whole room. It's amazing the power that just a little light can have in true darkness. If that light is not diluted, that light can illuminate everything. And that light lit up the room. And I really had wished that tour guide had said, The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not overcome it. Because that's what I couldn't help but think about when I was thinking about the light and the light of Jesus and the power of that light. Last week we were talking about the light in the circumstances of devastation. And we talked about different things like Sandy Hook, when horrible things happen, and trying to make sense and meaning of it. And one of the first reactions from people is when they see those kind of things, they think, well, there can't be a great God, because if there was a great God who loved us, he would not allow these devastating things to happen. And it's because we come from a worldview that doesn't understand what real life and real joy is about. Because in a system, a paradigm of real joy and real life, we know that devastating things actually can produce more life and new life. And this is not to say that God is willing horrible things to happen. I hate when I hear people say things like that. That makes it sound like, oh, it's all in God's plan. No, God is a poet, and he works out things to the will of those who sent him and are called according to his purposes. God weaves things together that even when we choose to do evil things, God still will work out his best for those who are loving him. That's the amazing thing of God, that he produces light and life out of darkness and death. And so in understanding true light and understanding true life, we can look at the darkness and we can see that it is not overcome. It is not going around. We're not talking this week about the devastating things that fire can cause, but this week we're talking about the light that it produces. There's a movie called The Last Crusade. And if you've never seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, I apologize right now because I'm giving you a spoiler. If you plug your ears, go into the bathroom, and make some noises, you probably won't hear it. So if you're that desperate to not have the movie ruined to you, please do, because I am going to talk about the end of the movie. But in the movie, there's Sean Connery and Harrison Ford. Now, Sean Connery actually had to be convinced that he should take this part because he was concerned that people wouldn't believe that he could be Harrison Ford's father, because they're so close in age. And this is just a side note, but I would love to have seen the guy who's trying to convince Sean Connery to take the part. Just say, hey, Sean, you're a great-looking guy, don't get me wrong, but you've looked like you were 70 since you were 40 years old, right? You're just one of those guys. It's like Steve Martin. He turned gray when he was 13, right? It didn't matter how young the guy was. He just looks old. It's like you look like you're his father. In fact, they're kind of thinking you probably waited a long time to have kids, with Harrison Ford as your son. Well, they have this great interaction, and I love Sean Connery, and he's got this way about him with his accent. It makes everything sound refined. Sean Connery could be talking about anything, and it sounds great, right? Because he's Sean Connery. He's got the Scottish accent, but then it's got this refined sense to it. I'm Sean Connery. It's kind of like he's always James Bond, no matter what part he plays now. For me, it's like shaken, not stirred. And that refined thing, it's sometimes hard to hear his words, but I really think he could talk about anything. Like, he could say, before I take out the trash, I like to rifle through it to see if I can find anything of value. It's like, wow, that's really eloquent. Yeah, that's refined and eloquent and beautiful. And you forget that you're talking about rifling through the trash when Sean Connery talks about it. If I ever had bad news had to be broken to me, I wish that the person would do it in a Sean Connery. You've got cancer. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm fine with that, right? That's the kind of thing of Sean Connery. Now, my brother Robert is apparently very bad at understanding what Sean Connery is saying, and I'm going to share with you one of the examples of how he mishears Sean Connery. But first, I got to give you some context. So there's this character. I'm going to call her what is it? It's like Eliza or something, Elza, but I can't remember her name. Anyway, she's a character in it, and she's after the cup of Christ with Sean Connery and Harrison Ford. So they're all after the cup of Christ, but not for the same reasons. At a certain point, they find the cup of Christ, and it's about to fall. It's about to fall into this cavern. And she's reaching for it, but to reach for it, she's hanging on for dear life. And she's reaching for it, and she thinks she can get it, but she can't. And she slips, and she falls, and she dies. Harrison Ford, though, trying to reach for her, also slips and falls. And Sean Connery's holding on to him and trying to keep him there. Harrison Ford's reaching it, and he goes, I can reach it, Dad. I can reach it. And at a certain point, Sean Connery goes, Indiana, let it go. And so he realizes he needs to let it go. And he pulls him up, and they run out of there just in time. The place collapses. The cup of Christ is lost forever. They went through all these difficulties to get this cup of Christ, and then it was gone. Like it didn't even matter. So they get out of this building, and Sean Connery says to Harrison Ford, he says, for Elsa, the cup of Christ was a prize, right? She never really believed in the cup of Christ. And it's not an exact line, but Harrison Ford says, what did you find when you were there? And according to my brother Robert, he says, elimination. I mean, like, what is he trying to kill the girl? Like, is he happy she died? What do you mean, elimination? Why? And we said, Robert, why is he saying elimination? And he's like, well, you know how, like, people have a bucket list of things they want to accomplish before he died? He eliminated one of those items. It's like, I'm like, you just lost the entire meaning of the movie. What he actually said was, illumination. What did you find? Illumination. Meaning was found. That's what he realized. Sean Connery's character developed to the point where he realized what life was really about and what the cup of Christ was really about. What life was really about. Illumination. And if we searched our whole life for illumination, we would find a prize of true value, of true worth. Better than any token, like the actual cup of Christ, what's the term? Archaeological cup of Christ. If we instead understood what this cup, the cup that we have every communion is of, and what it's about, then we found true value because we found illumination. The light of Jesus shines, and when we allow it to shine in our life, it'll make sense of every circumstance, whether dark and difficult or joyous and wonderful. It gives meaning and rich joy. And when you want to understand something in your life, no matter what it is, small or big, look at it under the light of Christ. Look at it under the light and the example of who Jesus is. And when you do that, you understand its true meaning. The meaning of life is through Jesus and his light. The wise men, by the way, we don't know how many there were, but the wise men were following this light in the sky. And eventually the light stopped. And there they saw the baby Jesus. They give him gold, frankincense, and myrrh, because those are the gifts you give a king. Here, these wise men were worshiping this little baby. That's amazing right there. Why? Because they had received the illumination. They knew that even though at this point this baby was a helpless infant, this baby would be the King of Kings. And so they bowed down to him and they honored him in their life. True illumination. So this week, as we go throughout this week, let's reflect on that light. Let's reflect on the light of the King of Kings, the gift of this baby Jesus, that if we believe in him, he adds meaning and understanding to our life. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, I thank you that you sent your Son to die on the cross for us, and that by his light, we can see everything else. So, Lord, whenever there's a circumstance in my life, whatever it is, a difficult thing, something that I'm struggling with and seeking to understand, or direction that I'm looking for you to provide, be a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path, that you show me the way in which I should go. that I lean not on my own understanding, but look to your light in every avenue and asset and everything of my life, given value only in reflection and a gift to you. And Lord, as we come now to communion, and we have this very simple meal, help us to understand the true gift of the cup of Christ. Not a gift that's so limited that it could only give us life extended in this world, but so meaningful that it gives us life in the next. So meaningful that though in this world we might just see as a dim reflection, like looking into a mirror, through this gift that you have given us that we celebrate each week, we are given and take in true life that allows us to one day be face to face with you. So Lord, help us to reflect on all the things that we have done and all the ways in which we do not deserve this gift, but do so in rejoicing because we are not measured by our own merits. We are not surviving by the light in which we produce, but we are living off of the light of your life. So Lord, help us to come with rejoicing and dancing and celebrating as we receive these gifts in your name. Amen.